So first thing I did was call my brother and go, dude, what's this lymphoma thing? He says, what? I said, well, I mean, it looks like I have cancer. And he says, oh, come on now. And of course, I was interpreting the chart. So he was like, well, who are you? You're not a doctor, you know? And I said, but it says pretty clearly lymphoma. I was a senior developmental engineer in electronics for a total of about 40 years. And since the cancer diagnosis and since the treatment, I've had to retire. But I really wish I hadn't had to retire. And I have a identical twin brother, and I have a sister that's 10 years older. And so I guess my brother was the one that really got me through all the treatment and everything. He was here to drive me to the hospital whenever I needed it, and I had a few infections in there, and spent a lot of time in the hospital during the treatment. And I just can't thank him enough. He got cancer right as I was coming out of it, so, and that was disturbing.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry to hear about his diagnosis, and that, as your twin brother, he was there for you. And then as you were sort of winding down, and then he started, he got his diagnosis. Before we do, let's talk a little bit about how you even knew something was wrong. I know you described back in December of 2019, you were wide awake in the middle of the night because of pain, right?
Yes. So I had noticed it. I had a few nights in a row where I had just this pain in my abdomen and in my side. And when I laid on that side, which I preferred to sleep on, there was pain that would keep me awake, and I could sleep most nights, but this one particular night I woke up at like I said, about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it just wasn't feeling right. And there were some things that led up to this, and that 2 months before I had a blood clot in my leg, and they told me, you can't take ibuprofen anymore because of this blood clot. It's going to make things much worse.
I think what's important too is, you drove yourself to the ER. This is in the middle of the night from this sort of pain that you felt in your back, left kidney area. They took your vital signs. And then they actually decided to do a blood test and also do a CT scan of your chest and abdomen. So there was enough pain you were communicating, where they said, we need to do more here. What was going on in your head as they were performing all these tests?
When they did the CT scan, that I thought, well, that's a little bit weird. I figured they should be able to see anything in the blood work that, would have come up, but they went ahead and did their thing as they saw fit, and we really didn't come up with a lot other than there was a mass in there. And the first scan, it was the mass was about 6 centimeters in diameter, and or like 2.5 inches, and so they didn't know what it was. They were thinking that they had done the surgery there too on me when I had the blood clot in my leg. So their thought was it could just be a mass of blood.
Right, left over from those procedures.
Leaked out of the joint where they put the catheter in for my blood clot. So they went ahead thinking that that's what it was. that it was just some sort of a liquid mass, and it was kind of not pushing things around too much. But
then after you went to the ER for this pain, they did do the CT scan and ultrasound, also a real colonoscopy,
yes,
no indication of cancer. And then finally, there was a test for additional blood labs.
yes. And I think that's where they started to think that the mass was more solid than just the liquid, just blood floating around.
And if I could just interject here, I mean, I know that there were a series of things that kind of had to happen, but it led to a CT guided biopsy of the mass.
Yeah.
And you said it was done outpatient. Okay, so that's all. This next part is where I really want to go in and highlight, which is you have this procedure done, and that was December 17th. And then 2 days later, you're looking at your online summary.
Yes. And there was a listing there of what the biopsy had found, and there were a bunch of numbers and CD20s and all kinds of different things. But then the diagnosis was diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. And I looked at that and I said, I went back up to the top. Wait a minute, is this my file? Did I accidentally get in somebody else's file? And so that was a shock, because I had heard of lymphoma before, and it was never good. It was never in a good light. And so first thing I did was call my brother and go, dude, what's this lymphoma thing? He says, what? I said, well, I mean, it looks like I have cancer. And he says, oh, come on now. And of course, I was interpreting the chart. So he was like, well, who are you? You're not a doctor, And I said, but it says pretty clearly lymphoma. And so we went on, I knew I had a doctor's appointment the next day with the oncologist. So I just figured out, well, I'll let it slide there. And I, of course, had a little trouble sleeping that night, but I didn't really get sad about it. I was thinking, well, they'll just tell me that it was a mistake, and and I'll carry on. And when I went to the doctor, they said, no, that wasn't a mistake. And we really do want to start treating you pretty soon. So they started to set up all of the appointments outpatient. And it was going to be 3 to 4 weeks to start chemo, and another 5 weeks to do the PET scan and that kind of a thing. And I was going, wow, can't they get me in any sooner? I mean, it seems like I need it.
Actually, here I'd like to also kind of detail this, because I've heard this and I felt the same way. It's like, wait a minute, you're telling me that I have cancer, but I have to wait to like actually get treated or even figure out what this is?
They were going to try and bump them up sooner and let me know and everything. But at that point, they had already said, you're not working for a while. So.
But let me ask you this, Kris. I know you've been working your whole life. You've been, an engineer, high level, 64 at the time of your diagnosis now. The feeling is there any feeling of, I've done all of what I'm supposed to do in life. I've done the work, and now I'm supposed to kind of go into the golden years. But now you're telling me I have to deal with this. Like, what was that feeling for you?
Well, the feeling for me was, when can I go back to work? I had intended to work another 10 years if I could. I told them I was planning on working at least 10 years, because that was a good question for them to ask, was, wait a minute, you're 60, 61 years old. What are you going to do? Are you going to retire next year? Or, no, I want to work for 20 years if I can. My brain will hold out, but obviously that wasn't going to be the case.
So it was hard for you to hear actually a different way, which was you wanted to keep working. You were told you're going to have to stop for a while, and who knows how long. We'll talk about more, post treatment after too. I know that was important to you. So Kris, you go through this whole entire process. It's around the holidays, which is, gosh, doesn't it always happen around the holidays? Yeah. And if we could fast forward a couple weeks later, you were admitted to the hospital, outpatient. This is 2020, by the way. So we're about to,
Yeah.
this is great timing. You go to the hospital. Talk to me about how you were able to, I guess, mentally, where you were, emotionally, where you were. You had your brother, he was there with you at some of these appointments, but, and yeah, how was it transitioning into, oh my gosh, I'm at the hospital now?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a surprise. They called me and said, okay, we're admitting you to the hospital. We have a room for you on the oncology ward, and we're gonna do all of the initial stuff, the first chemo and the PET scan and so on, inpatient, because we can get you in much sooner. I said that kind of came as a surprise, but I was ready for it. They told me that that was going to probably happen, so I got ready for it, and my brother was able to hang out with me while all of that stuff was going on. So he took me into the hospital, and we got all settled in the room and everything. And I was only there a few days, I think 4 or 5 days. And he was there every day to visit me and everything. And well, all the way up until March, when they closed down the visiting situation. So he was taking me to all my doctor's appointments so he could be there as a witness. And I said, well, what did he say about it? Was incredible. Like I've heard so many people on your videos say, after they said cancer, everything else was gone. And even though I knew that that's what my diagnosis was before they actually told me, because I had told them, what nice system you got here, with the where you find out, just ad hoc online that you got cancer. But they tuck their way around it pretty well. It doesn't happen all the time, but they're trying to figure out a way to make it different. So
Let's talk about that, just because a lot of people now have the, different portals depending on what hospital
oh
system
yeah.
you're with. What was that like to see you got results pretty quickly, a day sooner than you would have at the doctor's office, but what was that like for you?
It was interesting. I mean, of course, I spent the rest of the day looking everything up online, what all the CD20s were, and the C8 things, and all the different, genetic markers and what they were all saying. And none of it made any sense to me. So I just carried on, and I'll find out tomorrow what's going on. And the doctors, when I did go to the office, didn't really go into much detail. They just said, we're going to do chemo, and it's going to be this R-CHOP thing. And they told me what drugs they were and all that. And they said that the first one that I get is going to be a weird one, because it's going to be, they have to decide how long the treatment has to be. So the first chemo in the hospital was 16 hours. And when they figured out how fast I could take that first drug, they cut it down to like 7 hours. So all of my chemo treatments after that were 7 hours. But it there really wasn't a lot of information that I got in the first visit. They handed me a folder that was probably about this thick, and I didn't read any of it. And and I've heard that a lot too, that other people, the last thing I wanted to do was dig into a bunch of medical jargon that I didn't understand anyway.
Let's talk about the treatment. You're told, okay, you've got this, it's non-Hodgkin lymphoma. They kind of told you about it. They kind of didn't. They just said, here's your treatment. You're going to start. You did the R-CHOP. And that first infusion, which I think is typical, they're trying to test to see, especially maybe with the rituximab, is there an allergic reaction? We're going to see how fast or how slow we can do this. And so they were able to eventually figure out a better time for you. Overall, with the R-CHOP, were there side effects in particular that really, really were hard to deal with? And how did you get through them?
I think the only real side effect I had were, and I don't know if it was actually a side effect, were the infections that I had. I had two infections of some sort. They never really did define the infection, that became sepsis or septic. And so they were very concerned about that, of course, and I spent a few days in the hospital with each of those. And it pushed out my chemo treatments uh, by about the amount of time that I was in the hospital. So it's usually about a week or a week and a half that they'd push out my chemo treatments. And I was really looking to get those over with and see what happened, because otherwise I had no real side effects from the chemo. I was a little tired right the day of the chemo, and maybe the next day a little bit, but then I had a lot of fatigue from other things going on too.
You did have the infections. That was a lot to deal with. And I know that delayed treatment a lot. Speaking of which, of course, as we mentioned, you were going into this in January of 2020. So by the time end of March and April rolled around was when COVID protocols started to happen. Really quickly, just in terms of having to deal with that, it's already something that is not easy, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it was strange because the hospital moved the infusion center to an easier place to get to in the hospital. So that most of us that were dealing with them, which were mostly cancer patients, we could just walk in a door and we're in that lab or in that area. So that worked out really well. But that was only one visit out of the 6 that I had. And then they moved it back to what I call the way down the hallway thing. This hallway's like a mile long to get there. And it was strange because it seemed like there was doom at the end of this hallway. You couldn't see all the way down to the end of the hallway. And but when I got down to the end of the hallway, everybody was awesome to deal with. And I used to show off my port, and have the nurses all giggling, because, well, what do you think of this? But we all got over that too. Well, I like to see everybody smiling. I'm the type of person that when I was walking down a hallway at work and I passed somebody, I always smiled at them. And that was different after the COVID thing hit, of course, but I still tried it and nobody responded. But
Can you talk about how it was to go through this experience really, I mean, alone? I mean, you talked about that sort of feeling isolated. What is it like to go through treatment when it's like that? I know you had support outside of the house, but just not having it in the house, or, was that impactful for you?
well, I had a nurse that came to my house once a week, and that was just to maintain the bandages and stuff in the surgical point for the nephrostomy tube that I had to help with my kidney issue, my kidney failure. And so I mean, I got to know her pretty well, and she was a lot of fun. Um, oh, let's see, what else was there? My sons, I felt really, really bad for them because I knew they wanted to come and visit me, but they were both in retail, where they dealt with the public every day, and their companies, their separate companies, wouldn't allow them to work from home, or there wasn't any way they could, since they were dealing with the public every day. So neither of them wanted to come visit me because they just assumed that if they gave me COVID, that I was dead, that I was going to die. And they were probably right. I don't know for sure. But the whole being alone thing, I guess I was just so used to it. I'm not, it didn't bother me. I didn't let it bother me at all. I felt the same loneliness that I had before I had the disease. So how did I deal with it before? Every once in a while go out for drinks with my friends, and I had both men and women that I could talk to about anything. And it just, like I joke about it too, but I that's why I liked working so much, is I was hanging out with 700 of my closest friends. So I knew everybody in the plant, and Although I might not have known their name, I knew their face and I knew kind of what their family history was and everything. And I could talk to anybody in that facility and feel better when I walked away. We ran 3 shifts at that place. So there was always somebody in the plant to go talk to, even if it was just about work. It was always good. I liked being technical with people and teaching them things. And so many of the people in that facility appreciated the fact that I would talk to them as somebody at their level, or trying to bring them up to my level of knowledge. They all appreciated that a lot. And I'd give anything to be there again, to be there right now.
Can you talk about the impact of that?
I worked until January, before my doctor finally said, "Nope, you're done." It's been a lot rougher than even the medical leave, because the medical leave, I knew that at the end of it, I was probably going back to work. And I was so excited to go back to work after the cancer treatment. And my doctor said, "You really shouldn't. You should just retire now." But I don't want to. And we couldn't come up with a really good reason to present to the Social Security Disability Board, because, well, okay, my legs hurt and they're weak. Well, why? We don't know. And to this day, we still don't know. And the thing that finally got me through all of it was chemo brain, which was really weird because I was an advanced level engineer, and I sat at a desk staring at a computer all day. Well, I'd get up and walk around once in a while, but apparently it was the best situation, because I was approved for Social Security disability 2 weeks after I applied. And I've heard people that have gone for years trying to get disability insurance from Social Security with really obvious physical problems. And I was really surprised by that.
So a rare benefit of
Yeah.
being able to say, "Hey, I have this chemo brain." Well, thank you, Kris, for sharing all that. I do want to make sure, as we're coming up at time, to be able to talk about, gosh, this person you leaned on, Kurt, your twin brother, someone you're so close to, as you were winding out of this cancer experience and the treatment and everything, he then started feeling symptoms. Can you talk about that?
Well, we were sitting in talking in my house at one point, and I said, "Well, if you have," I had so many issues with the kidney, and even after all the treatment, the UTIs and I had stents in the ureter for a little while. I had that nephrostomy bag and everything on me for over 6 months. And with all of that, he told me one day that he was having trouble going to the bathroom. And I said, "Get your butt into the doctor right now and don't sidestep it. Tell him exactly what's going on." And so he went to our doctor, and he did a urinalysis on him. And they said, "Wait, there's cancer cells in there." And they discovered he had bladder cancer. But it was really early, they said, with the diagnosis. So he went through like 1 round of chemo, but they put it right in his bladder. And then he did immunotherapy for, I think, like 8 visits or something. It was almost every 3 weeks, almost like my chemo. And then they set up a maintenance plan for him after they told him that he was cancer free. And so we were celebrating that one too, but mildly celebrating because it was still COVID. But he came out of it really well. And I am just so happy that happened, because there were a couple of scares where they thought it might have gone into the muscle tissue, and I've heard that that's not a good sign.
It changes everything with the bladder cancer
Yeah.
once it's gone into the muscles around. So actually, this is a great important point. I mean, we don't know when Kurt would have checked it out without you saying, we don't know. We just know that he did go and he went after you encouraged him. And I think that's a really important message. I've heard from a lot of men I've talked to, culturally speaking, it's a little bit more hesitation to go to the doctor. I can handle this. Can you talk about that?
But he was that kind of guy, very tough, and he wouldn't admit to anything. And he was just like my dad. And like my dad, when he found out he had lung cancer, it was way too late. And they just said, well, how long do you want to live? And he took the chemo treatments and everything and lived for 15 months. So with Kurt, yeah, he would wait until it was killing him before. He's had 2 heart attacks, and both of them were like, why didn't you come in when you actually had the heart attack? Well, I just thought it was, it needed an antacid or something, and no, I've never had the heart issues, but I mean, I heard that it could have happened with the chemo, but no, I haven't seen any of that come up.
What's your guidance to other men about, and in general, just people who are unwilling maybe, or a little hesitant to go to the doctor? I can handle this. It's not a big deal. When you start to feel something's not right with your body, what would your message be to people like Kurt?
Well, for me, it was my back hurts, yes, but not in this spot. In this spot, I've never felt that pain before. And I've fallen off motorcycles 100 times. And, I mean, I probably invited all of the medical issues I have now with my limbs and things that don't want to work, but don't just push it aside, especially as you start to get older. It amazed me how much, well, getting those sepsis infections, or the infections that led to the sepsis, when the actual sepsis set in and my brain wouldn't work right, and I was stumbling around the house, and my brother's trying to keep me from falling, and I'm doing these calculations in my head that make absolutely no sense. And it was like I was at work, but I wasn't at where I work. Don't just, I would have probably just said, I'm just weird, And my brother said, no, I think we're going to the hospital now. And so he loaded me in the car, and we got there, and the nurse, did all my vitals and all that stuff. And she says, holy moly, let's get him into ER right now. And I mean, my blood pressure was really low and my heart rate was really high. And so I was in the throes of it, but just don't let it slide. It's, if you have a pain that doesn't feel like a normal pain, because I know every man has some sort of a pain that he doesn't admit to, or that's been around for 20 years, and it'll be okay. It probably won't be, but if another one comes up, have them look at that one. And just, it's simple, it's a half an hour at a doctor's office, and you're done with it, or even a couple hours at an ER, if you have one that's not too busy.
Is there any last thing you want to say to people, the strongest message you have after going through this cancer experience that you think other people would benefit from?
I guess that's the thing, is make sure you get diagnosed. If if you think, or even have just this remote idea that there could be something amiss inside your body, get it checked out. There's no reason not to.